Welcome to the Asian Leadership Conference webinar, and my name is Jin Myung Kim, and I'm Washington correspondent of the Joseon Ilbo. And so let me introduce briefly about the Asian Leadership Conference, because as an annual event hosted by the Joseon Ilbo, Asian Leadership Conference is South Korea's leading international conference where global leaders come together to discuss and provide possible solutions for the issues in Asia. And this webinar is preliminary virtual event, and we will host the actual conference in November. And I am really delighted to have two distinguished panels, and so thank you for sharing your time. And personally, I really don't feel the need to formally introduce you because when considering how well known you are, especially to South Korean audience, but let me first start off by thanking Mr. Mark Knapper for taking your time to join us today. Yes, and Mr. Knapper is Deputy Assistant Secretary for Korea and Japan in the Department of State of the United States, and he was in Seoul in 2016. He was in Seoul as a charge d'affaires from 2016 to 2017 to 2018, and before that, Deputy Chief of Mission from 2015 to 2016. And thank you. I'm really thrilled that you're able to join us. And I would also like to thank Ambassador Joseph Yoon. And this is your second webinar, and I really appreciate that. And Joseph Yoon was U.S. Special Representative for North Korea policy from 2016 to 2018, right? And he was ambassador to Malaysia from 2013 to 2016. And our topic today is U.S. in the Northeast Asia, and I think it is really critical moment for the region because due to the Chinese ascendance and U.S. response, and it is really likely to change the dynamics in the region. So we are seeing interesting and also risky times. And but let me start with the question on U.S.-RK alliance. And this is a really simple question. And Mr. Knapper, the South Korea's Vice Foreign Minister Choi Jong-un will visit Washington D.C. shortly, and so I want to ask you the expectations from U.S. side, and what issues do you think will come up?
Well, thanks, and let me just say thank you very much for the invitation to join you today. It's really a pleasure to be part of this event. It's great to see my old boss and colleague, Ambassador Yoon, as well. It's always a little bit intimidating to appear on the same broadcast as he, but I'll do my best. But yeah, I mean, there's frankly, although I don't have anything to announce at this moment in terms of Vice Minister Che's visit, certainly we would expect contact with us to include discussions of everything from the importance of our alliance and how we can grow it to the importance of working with South Korea on various projects like our Indo-Pacific strategy, their South Korea's new Southern policy, and so forth. I mean, there's just so much going on right now in our two countries' relationship. It's very exciting, and we're very much looking forward to the chance to see Vice Minister Che in a new role and to continue to build a good and strong relationship with him.
Yeah, but so you mentioned the Southern policy and Indo-Pacific strategy. I think currently all I'm hearing in Washington D.C. is China and China, and so. But it's been a while that South Korean and American officials have talked about the potential cooperation between South Korea's Southern policy and U.S.'s Indo-Pacific strategy. But can you pinpoint a specific area of the cooperation? And so today, Japan and the United States, they jointly issued a ministerial joint statement on the Mekong development. So are we going to see the similar things?
Well, certainly the idea of cooperating and linking up our Indo-Pacific strategy with that of the New Southern Policy, I think is based in many ways on the same goals, which is to work with a like-minded ally, like the Republic of Korea, a like-minded partner that shares our values and shares our commitment to the principles of things like openness and inclusiveness and transparency, respect for international norms. These are all things that we and South Korea share. And with these shared values, with these shared principles, we see a real opportunity in the region, in the Indo-Pacific, to support three pillars. We call it prosperity, people, and peace. And prosperity is things like cooperating together on energy. It's cooperating on development assistance and infrastructure, development finance to help countries in the region to grow and promote their economies. Of course, people. This is things like people ties, human security, and then of course the third pillar of peace. It's things like maritime security, building capacity to allow the nations of the region to ensure that they have access to clean water, that their borders are secure, and that their maritime regions are secure. And so, really, I mean, it just makes sense for the U.S. and South Korea to work together, and we very much appreciate President Moon and his vocal support for this effort, together with President Trump. And we kicked off in earnest last November on the margins of the East Asian Summit, and would expect that on the next occasion of the East Asian Summit, we hopefully will have some big news and big projects that we can announce in terms of the kind of cooperation that our two countries are engaged in right now.
But let me ask you a related question, because you mentioned maritime security, but I think it was like 2 weeks ago, the South Korean defense minister, he declined to join the trilateral meeting with counterparts from US and Japan. And how do you view it? How was that?
Well, I mean, we understand that he was unable to join for reasons that were beyond control, and it's we certainly would have welcomed him. I know that it would have been a great opportunity for our three countries, our three ministers of defense, to sit down. But we hope there'll be future opportunities, and we hope that that the occasion will come. We trilaterally can find other opportunities to promote our shared agenda and to really strengthen the shared values, the shared principles that our countries enjoy.
Okay. Ambassador Yun, I will turn it over to you, because we are familiar to with the official statement that U.S. and South Korea, our alliance is robust and ironclad. That's official statement. But as you know, many experts in Washington D.C. they argue that U.S.-RK alliance is in trouble. And for example, last week, the South Korean ambassador to U.S., Lee Soo-hyuk, he said the U.S. is an ally, while China is one of the biggest trading partner. And I'm going to quote him. He said that security alone cannot make one nation survive. From my perspective, it shows clearly South Korean government's lack of interest in participating in U.S.-led China initiatives. So, how do you view the situation? How do you assess his remarks?
Yeah, I think it's a mistake, and I really do not think the administration is asking South Korea to choose between China and U.S. That's not the case. I think in the United States we understand that South Korea cannot choose, and it will not choose. In fact, it is very similar to countries in Asia, and their objective not to have to choose. I think U.S. puts itself in a difficult position if it's asking to choose. So that's not what U.S. is doing. Now, having said that, of course, U.S. and South Korea have a very strong alliance relationship, and this is a very important relationship, and it will put South Korea in difficulties at times. This is not the first time. now we are entering election, and both Trump as well as candidate Biden are very critical of China. So this really does put a bit of a spotlight, but I think it's a spotlight that certainly people who follow diplomacy understand, and that we cannot allow it to change. Having said that, I do think that as alliance has strong support both by American public and Korean public. There is no way that we can characterize relationship now as being in trouble or anything. Now, I worked in Korea, embassy there. President Moon Hyun was in power, and it's my own belief that the alliance was more in trouble at that time than it is now. There are some technical that the alliance should deal with quickly. One of them is the Special Measures Agreement, SMA, and another one, the transfer of wartime operation control. So those are the issues that experts and both leaders should follow their technical expert. So in that sense, I'm not so worried. It's just at the moment we are approaching U.S. elections is less than 2 months away. So people are generating this without, I don't think, too much foundation in reality.
Okay. And because Ambassador Yun just mentioned about SMA, and so Mr. Napper, is U.S. willing to seal the deal before the end of this year, because it has been 9 months after the previous special measures agreement expired?
Well, I think we wanted to seal the deal up, but it's a negotiation, and as negotiations go, there are certain technical issues we've got to address. We believe that we've shown flexibility. At the same time, as Yoon says, this is a problem to deal with. It's I don't think it's an existential problem in our alliance. I think it's just one issue that requires our collective wisdom. And I know that our two sides are committed to finding a way forward. I know that our two sides are committed to continue our discussions in a spirit of respect and in the spirit of really strengthening our two countries' relationship. So I don't count myself as someone who's very pessimistic or a doomsayer about this. I just think it's as allies we occasionally encounter difficulties, but as allies we find a way forward, and we will find a way forward with this. I am completely confident, and our alliance will emerge even stronger as a result.
So are you going to press Vice Minister Choi Jong-gun with this issue? Are you going to talk about it?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't be a very good diplomat if I did what we're going to discuss. And as I said, we haven't even announced the visit, so it's a little premature for me to get into any kind of details about a possible conversation.
Okay, so let me just ask a little bit about the nature of our alliance, because it was a few days ago, the Unification Minister Lee Young, he said a really interesting remark. He said that so it was like the Cold War alliance between the United States and South Korea will be changed to peace alliance at some point. And I don't understand. I don't know what exactly he meant with peace alliance, because to my understanding, our alliance is based on the Mutual Defense Treaty, which is desiring to strengthen the fabric of peace in the Pacific area. That was the exact words in the treaty, to strengthen the fabric of peace, and which means our alliance has always been for the sake of peace. So, what do you think is the core of our alliance? What is the values we have in common? So, any of you, I want to hear both of you. I want to hear from both of you. So maybe Ambassador Yun, do you want to go first?
Sure. Look, I did not
Mm-hmm.
familiar with Minister Lee's remarks on that, but it is a fact that we're all seeking sustainable peace. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think
Mm-hmm.
anyone argues that. And sustainable peace, peace on Korean Peninsula, that
Mm-hmm.
does away with Cold War legacy, and that's the goal. Now, the problem, of course, is that North Korea remains a nuclear weapon state. It possesses nuclear weapons. It tests nuclear weapons. It tests missiles, and often threatening to South Korea and Japan as a neighbor. So I believe that, to deal with nuclear issues, that is nuclearization of North Korea, we also have to deal with North Korea's perceived security issues. So in that sense, it makes sense to make denuclearization and a peace treaty or building peace as a joint goal. So far, U.S. as well as South Korea and others have mostly emphasized that North Korea must denuclearize first before we move on to peace. And so I do think, I mean, that issue, that insistence on dealing with denuclearization before anything else has really gotten us nowhere. We're stuck. And so I think to seriously rethink our framework for negotiating here. And one way is to deal step by step, both simultaneously on the parallel track, both issues and denuclearization. So that would be my view, but I have no idea what Minister Lee was talking about in the quote you just.
So, Mr. Napper, can you comment on this? Like, can you comment on the remarks?
Rather than that, I think you asked a little bit earlier, kind of what about the essence of our relationship between our two countries, and of course, it began. Our relationship began as a security treaty. It began with our shared sacrifices on the battlefield, but it's become so much more than that. And this is an alliance. This is a friendship that encompasses is the shared values and principles I described earlier. This is a relationship that encompasses a robust trade and investment relationship. I mean, the United States is the largest investor in South Korea. This is a relationship that is people to people ties. 2.5 million Korean Americans live in the U.S. We've got 60 some odd thousand young Koreans in the U.S. Many more young, a lot of young Americans come to Korea as well. And so I think when we talk about the Korea alliance, when we talk about how do we move forward together, we should talk in a broader sense, not just about our security relationship, but really about the full spectrum of things that we and Seoul do together. And it's remarkable, and it's only been really 70 years since we began this project together. But I think it's one of our great success stories.
So let's take this a little bit broader with the backdrop. So do you think China is primary challenge that U.S. and South Korea will face together in the future, or so? Ambassador Yun, can you answer the question?
Yes, I mean, I do think that, uh, you know, uh, for U.S. has not and will not ask Korea to choose between U.S. and China. Having said that, as an ally, I think the U.S. has a right to expect some support from South Korea in dealing with China. For example, I think where the international community is fairly unified in items such as industrial espionage, intellectual property rights, sensitive technology. I mean, those would be economic issues. I think the U.S. has a right to ask for South Korea to join international support for that, And then on strategic issues, I do think there is also a strong consensus in the region and beyond that Chinese claims in South China Sea are really not consistent with international maritime law. And so I think the West is right to seek assistance and support from South Korea, as the U.S. has done with Southeast Asian countries, with G7, G20. So those are the areas that U.S. as a partner, alliance partner, has a right to ask. But it will be very difficult for U.S., for example, to seek support for human rights in China, to seek support for like Xinjiang, Tibet issues. So that would be, to me, it would put South Korea in a very awkward situation without materially affecting domestic politics within China.
Okay. So, Mr. Numper, can you add some of your thoughts on Chinese threat?
Sure. I mean, I think if we look at, for example, what's happened in Hong Kong, and I think we saw a very strong reaction from South Korea to the destruction of the freedoms and liberties that people of Hong Kong had enjoyed for decades. As a result, the Chinese Communist Party imposing a new national security law and imposing rules on things like freedom of the press. And I think as a fellow democracy, I think as a country that shares the kind of values, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, I think it was natural for the Republic of Korea to come out and speak out against this kind of bad behavior and this kind of threat to democratic and other principles that we, the United States, Japan, South Korea, all enjoy. And so going forward, I think I would speak less about the expectation of the United States on South Korea, but I would speak about the expectations of the international community on South Korea. I think Korea as an example of a country that's, we talk about the miracle on the Han, right? Which is often used to describe Korea's economic growth and explosive blossoming and prosperity. But I think the other miracle on the Han is the democratization of South Korea and the espousal by the Korean people of democratic principles. And so I think, again, the expectation shouldn't be from the U.S. It should be self-grown. It should be self-generated from within South Korea itself when it sees these kind of trampling of basic human rights. And I would expect the international community as well to have high expectations of Korea, given the support that the international community provided the Korean people when it itself was going through democratic transition. And so I think this is just natural. We have to stick together. This is a tough time, and the kind of principles and values that we share are precious and are under threat. And I think countries like the United States, South Korea, Japan, Australia, the EU, Canada, India, it's our moment to really stick up, stand up against the kind of threat to our way of life that we're now facing.
So I know maybe it is too early to talk about the formation of a potential alliance, like sort of a multilateral security structure in East Asia. I think probably it is too early, too premature. But how do you think about it? What is the U.S. position on this? Because you mentioned we have to stick together, like U.S., South Korea, Japan, and so. Can you just elaborate a little bit about the U.S.'s position toward these multilateral structures?
Sure. No, I mean, and I think you're right to point out that the region has been missing for decades the kind of structure, say, that we have in Western Europe or the transatlantic alliance that we enjoyed that helped to keep the peace for so long. And I would say at this point, I mean, I think we're not looking at nailing down or signing anything soon to create this new structure. But I think the first step really is, I think, a shared recognition of our shared values, of our shared political systems, of our shared economic systems, of our shared goals, and the recognition of their challenges. And that's a good first step, I think, towards collaboration, cooperation, finding new, novel ways to work together, not just to advance our goals, but to defend our values. And so I think, going forward, we're going to see more and more of that. But really, it is a critical task of our time.
Ambassador Jin, how do you think about this? How do you think about the multilateral institutions within the region?
Yes, I think when certainly, I mean, both Mark and I were involved building what East Asia Summit, ASEAN Regional Forum, and all these institutions that has centrality in ASEAN, Southeast Asia, because there is someone who can build consensus, bring everyone in. So these are ongoing projects. And of course, Trump administration has really put in some effort on Indo-Pacific strategy. And so that's quite similar. There is more to be done, not just on security, but also in trade. So I must say, I was very disappointed when West pulled out of Trans-Pacific Partnership, because that was really a trade bloc that emphasized rules trade. And for I really, even to this day, I don't know why West pulled out. So I don't think we're going to go back. Trade is a very sensitive issue in the United States, but that was, essentially an opportunity that we rather lost. So this institution building has to continue, I believe, and whether it's on consensus, but I think I've always liked the idea of multilateralism, multilateral institutions, and I think it's a good idea that U.S. should play a leading role in building multilateral.
Okay, thank you. And so I'll just change the subject to trilateral relations with Japan, and so we've seen some change of landscape in Japan, and the Japanese they are going to have a new prime minister in a few days. And Mr. Napper, what does it mean to U.S. and South Korea? Do you think the new prime minister of Japan will have a better chance of improving its relations with South Korea?
Well, I hesitate to try and predict who the next prime minister of Japan will be. But based on, what we know about the three individuals who've decided to run for the presidency of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party, these are all individuals we know very well. The commitment to U.S.-Japan alliance is solid. And by extension, I think it's a generally accepted sort of wisdom among people who understand foreign policy and national security policy in the part of the world that trilateral cooperation between U.S., South Korea, and Japan, and then bilateral cooperation among those three countries are absolutely critical to maintaining peace and prosperity. Of course. GSOMIA was the subject of quite a bit of discussion last fall, and it came up again recently. And it's safe to say we're very pleased that the Korean government decided to continue to suspend its termination of the agreement. The United States has made no secret of of the value that we place in this agreement. I think it's important to be able to. It's an important tool for Japan and South Korea to use to exchange information in a crisis. And frankly, if we didn't have GSOMIA, again, if there's a crisis and there's a need to share information, and the U.S. has to become the go-between, I mean, that's virtually worthless. And so I think it was certainly a welcome decision to continue to suspend the termination of GSOMIA.
But South Korean officials, they just insist that they can always terminate the GSOMIA. And what if they really terminate GSOMIA at some point? What will be U.S. response to it? Can you just comment on that?
Well, I mean, I can't say exactly what our response would be said. You know, I mean, in a crisis, when there's a need to exchange information rapidly, whether it's a missile launch, for example, GSOMIA allows South Korea and Japan to trade information very rapidly without having to go through the United States, which was the way we used to do it. You know, and then GSOMIA really cut the U.S. out of the middle, allowed this direct exchange of info, and so really, if GSOMIA was if the suspension if the termination was suspended, I should say, if the termination of GSOMIA was suspended, this would, I think, just add an extra burden to our efforts to promote cooperation and to really promote our shared security in the region.
So maybe Ambassador Yun, I should turn it over to Ambassador Yun because he is a leading expert on the broader issue of East Asia. So perhaps so what do you think is the guiding principle of East Asia in terms of U.S. leading role? And can you just comment on that, like South Korea and the trilateral relations among the United States, South Korea, and Japan? And what do you think is the U.S.'s objective in this region?
Look, I mean, I think on the trilateral, I agree with Mark that we have U.S. good relations bilaterally with Japan. U.S. has good relations bilaterally with South Korea. The problem has been bilateral relations between South Korea and Japan. And so it is unfortunate that politicians on both sides, both South Korean politicians and Japanese politicians, are using this relationship as a political football. You know, they kick it around whenever they think they have short-term advantage in doing so. And as a result, using the history issue, using the anger that their population feel, using that arousal as a voting issue, and so it is almost predictable that when it's time for election, or when one government popularity is going down, they will use the issue, and that's been very, very difficult throughout past decades for the United States, for Washington, because let's face it, we have 29,000 troops in South Korea, we have 50,000 troops in Japan, and so we want these alliance relationships, bilaterally and trilaterally, to be stronger. I mean, quite seriously, I think the South Korea-Japan relationship is the worst I have seen in my, 35 years of watching Asian diplomacy and Asian political development. And although this is foremost a problem for Tokyo and Seoul to resolve, I do think U.S. has a role to play. I do think U.S. need to step in a little bit more, and I think here a quiet diplomacy would help. And so I think I would like to see a little bit more of it. Now, on the second part of your question, what does U.S. stand in Asia? I mean, certainly that has transformed quite rapidly, and now we are facing real challenge from China. For China, very close to home, all of these Asian countries are essentially Chinese neighbors, and so I think they feel that, you know, through historical and geographic relationship, they should be playing a bigger role. Now, the problem with China is that they will muscle in, you know, and so I think a lot of countries in Asia feel that believe that at least U.S. should be a somewhat of a role that will come in between, whether it's South China Sea issue, whether it's economic issue, and so on. So I think the U.S. has to play the role that will stand and in favor of international rules, international norms, and essentially be a defender of the international institutions that have kept us there. I mean, these institutions, you know, include, you know, UN Law of the Sea, it includes WTO, fair trade rules, protection of intellectual property rights, and also, you know, sovereignty. So I do think US has a role to play in Asia in doing all of that.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Nepper, I think let me ask you a related question, because Ambassador Yun just mentioned that United States should step in more between Japan and South Korea. Was it right? So I just want to ask Mr. Napper about how he will plan to do that. Are you going to step in more?
As soon as we hang up, I'm going
to. Oh, that's so funny. But what is the United States official position? I really want to know.
Well, I mean, we've put out our position many times that you know, it's we have no intention to mediate or to take sides, to get in between these two great allies and friends of ours. But at the same time, just because we're not mediating, just because we're not getting in the middle, it does not mean that we're not in. Just because we're not obviously taking steps to intervene, so to speak, does not mean we're disinterested or lack the will or the interest in trying to do something. Very often what we do is not immediately visible to the public or the press, but you know, we share the belief that quiet diplomacy among our countries can play a positive role. I think the United States, we can act as a convening power, a convening country to find ways for our three countries to sit down and work together. Obviously, a key shared challenge is in North Korea, and we very often sit down at a very high level among the three of us, or a level of the special representative. But there are other subjects certainly that we can tackle together. In fact, within the next couple of weeks, we, Japan and South Korea, are going to sit down for a conference, a virtual conference, unfortunately, but a trilateral conference on promoting STEM education, so science, technology, engineering, mathematics, STEM education for girls and women. This is something all three of us share an interest in, and so it's another example of working for the past 2 years really to move forward on this. But it's a way to again play a convening role where we show to our publics, we show to our press, we show to our elected representatives just how valuable and important cooperation between our three countries is, and we'll continue to do that because we believe it. We believe that as three strong Indo-Pacific democracies, we have a special obligation to do this. history issues, we know just how sensitive they are. In the United States, we have our own history issues which we continue to wrestle with, and so certainly understand that it's delicate, very sensitive issues at hand. But at the same time, we have large challenges ahead of us, and want to ensure that our three countries are fully prepared to meet those challenges together.
It's good to know that we're having a trilateral conference, and I want to change the subject to North Korea, and so it is really lucky that we haven't heard any news of provocation today, because September 9th is National Foundation of North Korea, and Ambassador Jun, I'd like to ask you how likely North Korea will engage in provocative actions before the U.S. presidential election, because the next month they will have another holiday, October 10th. This year it marks 75th year of foundation of North Korean Workers' Party. So how likely will they provoke?
So I think North Korea watching U.S. election very, very carefully. I think they are watching it even more carefully than Americans like Mark himself, They are very interested. I mean, let's face it, Donald Trump met with Kim Jong-un, 3 times, okay? So, he lifted Kim Jong-un from what we used to regard as a young dictator to almost a regional, if not a global figure. So I think Kim Jong-un really appreciates that. And so it is my own belief that Kim Jong-un would really like to see Donald Trump reelected. And so in that sense, I don't expect any provocation, such as a big missile test or a big nuclear test for the November 3rd election, because that could jeopardize Trump's chance to win. So my view is that there's not going to be provocation. Now, I mean, a really sensitive period is if Biden wins, what we call a lame duck period, November 3 to January 20th. That's the lame duck period, and in which inauguration has not taken place. So Donald Trump remains president while Joe Biden is president-elect. So that's a very sensitive period, and we may do something then. I don't know. I mean, I would very much hope that North Korea would be persuaded not to do anything during this very sensitive period. But again, before the election, I expect mostly a quiet time.
So you don't expect any October surprise, but I want to ask Mr. Nepper, because recently I think so the U.S. administration I think steps up some effort to restraining North Korea from provocative actions. For example, the Department of State and other government agencies jointly issued the industry advisory on North Korea ballistic missile procurement, and I just assumed that it is an effort to make North Korea refrain from any provocations before the election. But what is so? Can you elaborate on that? What was the United States government's intention?
Well, I mean, I think our intentions and our actions have been consistent for the length of this administration, which is, on the one hand, leaving the door open to diplomacy, leaving the door open to what we hope is a peaceful resolution of the international community's concerns about North Korea's nuclear and missile programs. But at the same time, pursue a pressure campaign, which we hope will shut off revenue and other means for North Korea to continue these programs. And so I don't think what you're seeing is necessarily keyed to the election. The timing isn't, I think, unique. I think if you look at our record, it's, like I said, consistent in terms of leaving the door open for diplomacy, exploring opportunities to engage, but at the same time, being very clear that the community won't tolerate continued efforts in these dangerous.
But recently, the Unification Ministry they suggested some ideas to promote economic cooperation between two Koreas. For example, individual tour to the Mountain Gumgang, and also they suggested a barter deal between two Koreas, and also. Minister Lee Nyang, he suggested to restructure the working group between U.S. and South Korea, where two countries discuss sanctions-related issues. So, I want to hear both from you, and how do you view it? What is the U.S. position like on their suggestion? Maybe Ambassador Yun, can you go first?
Yes. I mean, certainly there are many ideas, many leverage. What I think what is missing is degree of cooperation and collaboration between all the stakeholders. I mean, I think, for example, inter-Korean projects like Daesung, Kumgang, Railway, and so on. That's a big. That should be worked in connection with the U.S. approach to denuclearization and so on. So I think at the moment, I don't expect many items to move because of the American political agenda, but certainly I do think that should be consulting very closely with South Korea, and we should also consult closely with Beijing and Tokyo, and so that we have a regional approach that is common, and so sharing the burden as well as bringing in leverage like inter-Korean projects and also leverage from Beijing on their economic lifeline to North Korea. And so I just think we need much more diplomacy than what we're having now.
So, Mr. Nepper, can you share your thoughts on this, like the Unification Ministry's suggestions? Can we adjust the working group, or what is your thoughts, or what is the United States government's official position?
Yeah, well, as you noted in your introduction at the beginning of this program, I served in Korea, both as the deputy chief of mission, but then the chargé, for a pretty remarkable period of time in which we saw, on the one hand, we had fire and fury in 2017, but then that transformed into a great amount of contacts between the U.S. and North Korea, between South Korea and North Korea. And at the time, working very closely with the South Korean government, with President Moon and his administration, we found ways to help try to promote North-South contacts. I think the United States has always been very forthcoming when it comes to doing what we can to work with the United Nations and to for example, the Olympics are a great example, and the steps working with South Korea, the United States, and others took to allow North Korean athletes to have equipment, or to allow South Korean skiers to board an Asiana flight and fly to Kalmar or whatever up in North Korea, and so on and so forth. The rail survey, for example, that, the working group studied and eventually took steps to work with the UN to approve. And so, this idea that somehow the working group is an impediment, a U.S. designed impediment to North-South progress, I disagree with, because I think, frankly, the working group has done a lot so far to help out reconciliation. Continue to do so when we can ensure that these actions don't violate UN or other sanctions.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think we are heading to the end. And any final thoughts you would like to share with the audience? Like any final thoughts or words? No. So, Ambassador,
Why don't
do
we
you
just
have any final?
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I want to thank you and thank Mark Napper for a great session. And I
Mm-hmm.
would say to you that I think what we are coming up, November 3rd election, is a very, very important election, and it's being
Mm-hmm.
very tightly connected. So we
Mm-hmm.
need everyone to pay attention. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Mr. Nepper, do you have any final words?
I would just echo what I said at the
Mm-hmm.
outset. We appreciated this invitation. I always enjoy the President Ilbo's Asian Leadership Conference. I certainly hope that it can be convened in person come November. So we'll keep our fingers crossed. But in the meantime, thank you and congratulations for at least being able to do this kind of series using the technology available to us. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah, it has been a really great conversation. I think very comprehensive and very insightful. And I would appreciate both of you for taking your time to join us. And I also want to thank our audience for joining us for what I thought was an interesting conversation. And before I let everyone go, I just want to remind that, as Mr. Nepper said, we have an Asian Leadership Conference in November in Seoul, and partially in person and partially virtual, but we are looking forward to meeting you all there. And thank you for joining us, and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.